This is not the version that the story told, but the version it has tried to hide.
Hannibal led all his soldiers, without losing a single man, and swaggered right over the mountaintop under the very noses of the Roman legions. In fact, Hannibal learned this tactic from the Spanish natives. Years ago, his own father fell victim to this very trick and lost his life at the hands of the enemy. It wasn't until the next morning that Fabius realized he had fallen for Hannibal's ruse. He hurriedly sent out cavalry to pursue him, but ended up losing another 1,000 men to Hannibal for nothing. This caused the Roman legions to lose all face. From then on, the Romans had a saying, no matter what, Hannibal got through. It refers to accomplishing something successfully, no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Because Fabius's delaying tactics severely damaged the interests of Rome's allies, his political opponents had long accused him of being cowardly and incompetent. Now, with the incident of the ox horns, the calls for Fabius to step down grew ever louder. Seeing this, Hannibal decided to go all the way in helping Fabius, and gave him another divine assist. He sent his troops to attack Fabius's lands, burning all the surrounding farmhouses and fields to the ground, but left Fabius's own estate completely untouched, even stationing soldiers to guard it. This time, the Roman citizens completely erupted. What does it mean that Hannibal burns down all our estates but protects Fabius's estate? Could it be that this old man is colluding with the enemy? So, before Fabius's 6-month term as dictator was even up, he was summoned back to Rome under the pretext of performing a sacrificial ceremony, but in reality, it was just to remove him from office. While Hannibal spent a leisurely winter in the south, Rome was fiercely campaigning for the next year's consuls. In Rome, two factions emerged, the Fabius, supporting delay faction, and the aggressive war faction. It was now clear that the aggressive war faction had the upper hand. In the end, the delay faction elected Aemilius from the nobility, while the aggressive war faction elected Terentius. This Terentius was mediocre in both ability and experience. He was elected consul solely because his speeches advocating aggressive warfare were so impressive. It was also he who, at the Battle of Cannae, led tens of thousands of Roman soldiers to their deaths. The Battle of Cannae was the most remarkable battle of the European pre-gunpowder era. Hannibal used only 50,000 men to encircle 70,000 Roman troops, and all 70,000 Romans were killed. The gold rings stripped from the dead Roman soldiers by Hannibal's army were piled into a small mountain. Now, let's reconstruct this epic battle and see if it truly was the most remarkable one. On the morning of August 1, 216 BC, both sides lined up for battle in the village of Cannae by the Adriatic Sea. Hannibal had 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, while Rome had 80,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. The reason the Romans had so few cavalry was because Hannibal had wiped them out in battles the previous year, and they still hadn't been able to fill that gap. Both sides arranged their troops into 3 sections, left, center, and right, with infantry in the center and cavalry on both flanks. The only difference was that Hannibal's center formed a protruding, crescent-shaped arc, a formation that would play a crucial role in the upcoming battle. The Roman center, on the other hand, was a straight line. The first round of the battle was between Hannibal's front line of Gallic soldiers and the Roman front line of light infantry. Under the fierce assault of the Roman infantry, Hannibal's protruding crescent gradually caved in, with the Gallic soldiers retreating while continuing to resist. Hannibal had already anticipated this situation. The crescent shape of his formation allowed his center to hold out a bit longer. Meanwhile, the situation with the cavalry was the opposite. Roman cavalry was being steadily driven back by Hannibal's cavalry. The Roman cavalry on the right wing was led by Consul Paulus. They had already been pushed to the riverbank, but were still putting up a stubborn resistance. Many of these cavalrymen were sons of Roman nobles. In other words, they were all future commanders. The Roman cavalry on the left wing was led by today's overall commander, Varra. These cavalrymen were made up of Rome's allied states, and it was composed of. They were facing Hannibal's most elite Numidian cavalry, and at this moment, they could no longer hold their ground. At this point, a change occurred in the infantry battle in the center, marking the beginning of the second phase of the fight. With the Roman heavy infantry in the center joining Hannibal, the Gallic soldiers in the center had completely lost their combat effectiveness. At that moment, the Gallic soldiers who had been retreating suddenly spread out to both sides of the battle line. What appeared before the Roman heavy infantry was Hannibal's own heavy infantry. These men truly lived up to their reputation as the elite troops who had followed Hannibal across the Alps. With only 20,000, they managed to withstand the fierce assault of 70,000 Roman soldiers. At this point, although Hannibal's infantry were at a disadvantage, they had already begun to form a 3-sided encirclement. Hannibal's heavy infantry were at the front, the Gallic soldiers were on both flanks, and now, as long as the gap at the rear was closed, all 70,000 Romans would be completely surrounded. Naturally, this task would fall to Hannibal's cavalry. The Roman cavalry on the right wing, forced to the riverbank, had been completely wiped out. These future Roman commanders all died honorably in battle, with only a few managing to escape by jumping into the river. Consul Paulus, seeing that the cavalry unit he commanded had been destroyed and that his own horse had been killed by the enemy, chose to join the heavy infantry to continue fighting. The allied cavalry on Rome's left wing, with no river behind them to block their retreat, quickly fled under the command of Varra. Immediately after, Hannibal's now unoccupied cavalry circled around to the rear of the Roman infantry, sealing off the gap. At this point, Hannibal's encirclement plan was finally complete. 50,000 of Hannibal's troops surrounded 70,000 Roman soldiers. To encircle the Roman army meant to wipe them out completely, because the Roman soldiers were all made up of important citizens. Even when surrounded, they would not surrender. The former consul Servilius, who commanded the heavy infantry, was killed in action. The consul Paulus, who had just joined the heavy infantry, also died in battle. More than 80 senators who had joined the cavalry and heavy infantry were almost all killed, with only a handful managing to break through Hannibal's encirclement and escape. Among Among them was Scipio Africanus, who would later defeat Hannibal. At this time he was only 19 years old and not yet a commander, but this was already his third defeat at Hannibal's hands. It was precisely because he had personally witnessed Hannibal's brilliant tactics time and again that he was later able to use Hannibal's own strategies to defeat him at the Battle of Zama. There were still 10,000 Roman soldiers waiting in reserve at the rear camp. Since all their commanders had been killed, they didn't know what to do, so most of them were captured, with only the smarter ones managing to escape. In this battle, Rome lost more than 70,000 men, while Hannibal lost only 500, most of whom were Gallic soldiers. Looking back over all of history, this was the first and also the last time the Roman legions suffered such a devastating blow. It took Hannibal's army an entire day just to strip the valuables from the bodies of the dead, and even then they couldn't finish. The Roman people calmly accepted this reality, and did not punish Varro, the overall commander who had taken the initiative to challenge Hannibal but was defeated and managed to escape with his life. However, misfortunes never come singly at this time. News arrived that the two legions sent north to suppress the Gauls had also been wiped out. Ever since Hannibal entered Italy, the Gauls who had previously been subdued by force became rebellious again. So Rome sent 2 more legions, but they fell into the Gauls' trap. In pursuit of the enemy, the Roman legions entered the forest, but the large trees inside had already been sawed through by the Gauls in advance, causing them to fall like dominoes. Nearly the entire 2 legions were crushed by the falling trees, and then the Gauls seized the opportunity to come in and slaughter them. Even the commanders perished alongside their soldiers. In just a few days, Rome lost more than 80,000 soldiers one after another. The Senate and the devoutly religious Roman citizens could not accept such a blow. Unable to bear such a blow, they hurriedly sent Fabius to the Oracle of Delphi in Greece to seek guidance. Meanwhile, Hannibal's soldiers were all urging him to take advantage of the moment and immediately attack the Roman capital. If we attack now, in 5 days, we'll be having dinner on the highest hill in Rome. But the 31-year-old Hannibal turned a deaf ear to their advice. He firmly believed that only by causing the Roman alliance to collapse could Rome be truly destroyed, and that attacking the Roman capital now would be meaningless. So one of his subordinates pointed at Hannibal's nose and uttered a famous saying, "You know how to win victory, but you do not know how to make use of it." Rome is the most stubborn nation I have ever seen. When Hannibal returned 8,000 prisoners of war, all Roman citizens, not only did the Romans refuse to take them back, they even spent a high price to buy slaves to form new legions. Hannibal achieved a complete victory over Rome at the Battle of Cannae, so how exactly should he have used this victory to utterly crush Rome? This became a hot topic of discussion among everyone. Hannibal's subordinates even accused him, saying, "You know how to win a victory, but you don't know how to make use of it." At this point, Hannibal had 2 options. The first was to do as his subordinates suggested, march straight to the capital and capture Rome in one fell swoop. But the Roman capital had strong city walls, and to break through them, he would have to be prepared for a siege lasting at least 2 or 3 years. Moreover, he only had 50,000 men, of which just 25,000 were mercenaries brought from Spain. The Gauls who joined later could betray him at any moment in a crisis. With such limited forces, trying to attack a major city was nothing but a pipe dream. And most importantly, Rome had free citizens in more than 70 allied cities. If he attacked the Roman capital, these allied cities would surely launch attacks on him from behind. Therefore, Hannibal went against the opinions of others, and chose not to march directly on the Roman capital. But with a small force, was it really impossible to capture a major city in a short period of time? If Rome were to fall into crisis, would those allied cities really come to its rescue? Similar situations had happened before. Rome not only failed to receive help, but its allies even joined forces with the enemy to attack it. Another approach would be to completely dismantle the Roman alliance before attacking the Roman capital. This was also the method Hannibal always firmly believed would work. But as we all know, in the end, it still failed. So was there a problem with Hannibal's approach? Or was it simply an unsolvable problem to completely defeat Rome more than 2,000 years ago? Let's first take a look at how Hannibal carried out his plan, and how the Romans responded. After the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal quickly saw hope. The first to betray Rome was Capua. Capua is located in the Campania region of south-central Italy, and holds an extremely important position. The intersection of the 2 main roads from Rome to the south is in Capua, which means Capua controls the lifeline connecting Rome to the south. The people here, except for not being able to participate in Roman politics, enjoyed the same rights as Roman citizens. Before this, they had always fought alongside Rome against Hannibal. But now they switched sides just like that, and this wasn't even their first time betraying Rome. When a powerful city's state defects, it immediately sets off a chain reaction. Soon after, 4 cities neighboring Capua also declared their secession from the Roman alliance. In the winter of 216 BC, Hannibal and his soldiers finally no longer had to sleep outdoors through the winter. They all spent the winter in Capua, moved into houses, and even had comfortable beds to sleep in. At this point, Hannibal seemed to have every advantage, but in reality, he was already in a difficult and precarious situation. After the Battle of Cannae, he sent his younger brother Mago to Carthage to report on the victory, hoping to use this opportunity to gain support from his homeland. Mago showed the Carthaginian elders a mountain of gold rings, saying, "These were all taken from the Roman soldiers we defeated now. Isn't that impressive?"
So, tell me, isn't that impressive? But the elders countered, asking, "Then among the Latin peoples, which tribe has defected to our side? Out of the 37 Latin colonial cities, how many have broken away from the front lines and surrendered to Hannibal?" After all, Marconi was still young. Faced with the elders' sharp questioning, he could only reply, "Not a single one." The elders asked again, "Have any of the Roman allied cities shown signs of betrayal?" Marconi replied, "I don't know." The elders pressed further. "Have the Romans made any requests to Hannibal for peace talks?" Marconi said, "No, they haven't." An elder said, "Then what are you bragging about here for? How is this any different from 3 years ago, when Hannibal had just crossed the Alps?" So not only did the Carthaginian elders refuse to send reinforcements to Hannibal, they even sent Marconi to the battlefield in Spain. After all, Spain had brought Carthage considerable wealth over the years, and holding on to Spain seemed much more practical than trying to break up the Roman alliance. With no support coming his way, Hannibal was left with no choice but to turn to the Roman prisoners. In the past, Hannibal would torture Roman prisoners to death, then unconditionally release the prisoners from Rome's allied states. But this time, Hannibal softened. He still released the allied prisoners, but then gently said to the Roman captives, "As long as you can pay a ransom, I am willing to let you go home." So he allowed 10 prisoners to return to Rome as representatives to convey his gesture of goodwill. At this time, Hannibal had 8,000 Roman prisoners. If he released them, they might take up arms against him again. Moreover, the price Hannibal set was equivalent to that of the lowest grade slaves without any special skills, which already demonstrated his sincere desire for peace to Rome. In the past, both sides would exchange prisoners, but this time Rome had no prisoners from Hannibal's army. So after allowing these 10 prisoners to embrace their families as representatives, they were sent back again. The Senate was not unable to pay the ransom for these 8,000 citizens. These people amounted to nearly the strength of 2 Roman legions, and Rome desperately needed these 8,000 men now. But they would rather pay a high price to buy slaves to form new legions than pay the ransom to redeem these 8,000 men. Because what Rome was refusing was not the ransom for the prisoners, but Hannibal's attempt to test their willingness to negotiate peace. When Hannibal saw Rome's attitude, he was furious, and so he sold all 8,000 prisoners to the Greeks as slaves. To demonstrate their determination to continue fighting, all members of the Roman Senate were required to contribute all of their personal property, except for real estate. Moreover, in order to raise funds, the government issued wartime bonds, and all citizens, except for the proletariat, were required to purchase a corresponding share based on their household's financial capacity. The 10 allied states also extended a helping hand, providing Rome with funds, wheat, and soldiers. However, Rome only accepted the soldiers offered as aid. All the funds were returned, and the wheat was purchased at market price. At this moment, although the entire nation of Rome was united, their situation did not improve in the slightest. Moreover, yet another piece of bad news arrived. Another important allied city had also defected. Rome is the unluckiest country I have ever seen. Already driven to the brink of destruction by Hannibal, they now face more and more enemies, and have ended up being attacked on 5 fronts. To the east, their enemy was the Kingdom of Macedon on the Greek peninsula. To the south, the powerful city-state of Syracuse in Sicily. To the west, Spain. To the north, the Gauls. And the most formidable of all, Hannibal, was rampaging across the Italian peninsula itself. It was misfortune on top of misfortune. With such utter bad luck, what exactly did Rome do? How did Rome end up making enemies of all the major powers around the Mediterranean? It all started because of Hannibal. Let's start with Syracuse in Sicily. They had maintained an alliance with Rome for decades, never once betraying them, and even came to Rome's aid in times of trouble. But at the critical moment when Hannibal invaded the Italian peninsula, At a critical moment for the peninsula, Hiero, the ruler of Syracuse, passed away at the age of 90. His 15-year-old grandson succeeded him to the throne. However, not long after the grandson ascended the throne, internal turmoil broke out. Hannibal seized the opportunity and sent some spies to Syracuse to incite rebellion. He even promised the opposition in Syracuse that once Rome was defeated, the entire island of Sicily would be theirs. As a result, the 15-year-old grandson who had just ascended the throne was killed by the opposition, and the alliance agreement with Rome was thus nullified. Just like that, Syracuse, Rome's most important ally in Sicily, became its enemy. Moreover, Archimedes, who was said to be able to move the earth, was living in Syracuse at this time. He would pose tremendous resistance to the Romans who dared to attack Syracuse. Next is Macedonia to the east. At this time, the king of Macedonia was Philip V. Hannibal did not expect that Philip V would actually take the initiative to propose an alliance to destroy Rome together. Since Philip V was a relative of Alexander, although he did not dare to hope that he could defeat Persia, conquer Egypt, and march all the way to India like Alexander did, at the very least, it wouldn't be too much to ask to ride on Alexander's legacy and dominate all of Greece once more, would it? However, the arrogant Romans had expanded their sphere of influence into the Greek peninsula. The king of Macedonia, seeing how formidable Hannibal was in the Battle of Cannae, decided to join forces with Hannibal to eliminate Rome, their greatest threat. The king of Macedonia sent envoys to Hannibal, stating that he would first drive out Roman forces from the Greek peninsula, and then personally lead a large army to land on the Italian peninsula to fight alongside Hannibal. In gratitude for Macedonia joining the war, Hannibal also promised the king of Macedonia that once Rome was dealt with, he would lead his own army to the Greek peninsula to help Macedonia dominate all of Greece. In this way, the two great powers of the Mediterranean, Carthage and Macedonia, formed an alliance. In fact, whether it was Syracuse or Macedonia, they were merely enticed by the grand promises Hannibal made to them. 3 years earlier, Hannibal had also promised the soldiers who followed him across the Alps that once Rome was destroyed, they would become the new masters of the Italian peninsula. Fortunately, the envoys Hannibal sent to Macedonia were intercepted by the Romans, which is how Rome learned about their agreement. As for Spain to the west, that was Hannibal's homeland. From the very beginning of the Second Punic War, Rome had dispatched 2 legions there to fight. The Gauls to the north were even more of Rome's old adversaries, and with Hannibal's invasion, they had become more arrogant than ever. During the Second Punic War,
The most difficult period for Rome was the 4 years from 215 BC to 211 BC. Rome was facing the severe challenge of being attacked on 5 fronts, and the Senate had effectively become a wartime general staff, making adjustments in personnel appointments as well. Because under the Roman Republic, consuls could not serve consecutive terms, and with Rome fighting on multiple fronts, having only 2 consuls each year was clearly insufficient. Therefore, commanders were given titles such as former consul, praetor, or former praetor, and their actual authority was almost the same as that of a consul. Starting from 215 BC, Rome had the following 4 main commanders. Fabius, who had previously been appointed as dictator, was 60 years old this year. It was at this time that his nickname, the Delayer, became known as the Shield of Italy against Hannibal. Next was Claudius, who, because he often adopted aggressive tactics against Hannibal, was called the Sword of Italy. There was also Sempronius, who led a legion composed of slaves. This slave legion fought with exceptional bravery against Hannibal and played a crucial role. Next was Valerius, who was more skilled in diplomatic strategy, so the Senate appointed him to take charge of the Macedonian front.
Subscribe to Animystika not to miss anything. Like and share, and join me right away for a new trip in history.